Good morning, everybody. I am honored to be here. Known Carl for many, many years, and he spoke about the data center industry, and I am in the right industry at the right time. Years ago, you couldn't convince me that if I had a 20 megawatt data center, I would ever use all that power. It just was inconceivable. What am I going to do with the rest of it? The data centers I'm building today have 500 megawatts to 750 megawatts to keep up with the demand of AI hosting. So I'm proud to say that TierPoint is the largest AI hosting data center firm in the United States. We are running every major AI company you can think of. They are within my four walls, and they are expanding, and they're hungry for power, and they're hungry for space. So we are in the right industry at the right time. So just a minute about my background. I am one of the officers, investors in TierPoint. Corey had spoken about slang. My daughter tells me I'm an idiot all the time, which I believe is slang for really awesome at this point. That's not slang. Prior to my world here at TierPoint, I owned a behavioral instrumentation company. My background is in human behavioral studies, and I have a patent. I hold a patent for PTSD testing for soldiers coming back from battle, known as the Stroop procedure. Who here served in the military?
Well, this is how Paul and I met. You tested on me.
Yeah, I tested on Carl. I genuinely don't throw that out there as throwing roses. I genuinely mean thank you for your service, because you're responsible for me having the ability to have the way of life that I have now in this country, and I don't take that for granted. From Colburn Instruments, I moved after that patent. We sold that company to Harvard University, their commercial arm, Harvard Biosciences, and I spent the next couple years doing integrations for VA hospitals, which led to Department of Defense integrations, which led to GSA Schedule 70 integrations. And my career that was a sub-career working with the feds and working with three-letter agencies to roll out security protections kind of grew from there. My wife, when I sold my business, I sold the computer integration part of it to my wife for $1. I'm not allowed to own a single share of stock in Element 27. That is my wife's company, and she gets to sign contracts that need female participation on government entities. So from there, we did missile control infrastructure. The Aegis missile system, as well as the Coast Guard Deepwater program, stemmed from my life after human behavioral studies. And my best company ever was Evil Genius Cigars. So I owned a cigar company. Most fun I've ever had. Biggest cash outlay you ever had. You're paying 100% for these cigars before they even land in stores. So it's a lot of cash out of pocket. But we grew that brand quickly, and we became number 3 selling cigar for Cigars International in 2013. A large company came to me and said, we want to buy Evil Genius, and I'm like, great. And they said, we don't really like the cigars. Like, I thought they were good. No, the cigars kind of suck, but we love the marketing. We love everything about it. So Evil Genius lives today. I don't get a penny from it anymore, but if anybody loves those cigars, it's all me. They're all my blends. So let's talk a second about, I'm going to take you on a little bit of a different talk track here. You're going to be given a lot of technical deep dives over the next 2 days. My gentleman Dustin is going to give a real technical deep dive into how TierPoint is relying on the Corero stack. What you're seeing here is an actual ingestion of Corero's data into my infrastructure. We have an Elasticsearch, an Elk Stack integration system. We've created our own Siemens source system to cover TierPoint's large ecosystem. We've had so much success with it that we have now started to commercialize it, and it's going to officially launch in July. This is actual attack traffic on Corero's backbone with Corero's API showing attacks coming into TierPoint's ecosystem. The ability to integrate this kind of data and the ability to have a partnership with Corero that gives us access to an API, a true development partnership, is something that I'm going to bring this to an end with and tell you about my journey, because we're going to talk about how hard it is to sell security, and it is. So my background makes me really care about the why. There's a lot of companies that talk about the what and the how. A lot of it really, for me, comes down to the why and understanding that when you're selling security, we're really selling an insurance policy. I want to buy something that means that you're responsible for me being able to sleep at night. We are selling a product that the end user, in many ways, hopes to never use. We want to have that protection, but we don't want to have to rely on that level of protection that we're paying for. So it's an uphill battle. And I start with Deus ex machina. Everybody's heard the term. Now we translate it to God in the machine, but where it really started was in Greek theater, it was God on the machine. So they would lower the actor down onto the stage on a huge elaborate infrastructure to showcase that the God was coming down from the heavens on this large machine infrastructure. And it stuck with me over the years, A, because I was educated by Jesuits and Latin was beat into us, but B, because it really talks to modern computational systems and how far back all of it goes. Nothing's new anymore. These algorithms that we're learning for deep learning have been around forever, some of them over 100 years. So the ability to take these old algorithms and all these deep learning networks, the first actual cognitive neuroscience department deep learning was granted and moved to MIT back in 1952. Literally, that laid the foundation for the first big MIT deep learning lab and what is essentially the first AI lab back in 1969. 1969 is when officially in the United States, the advent of the AI lab came about. So we think about machine learning and AI today, it's somewhat of a new phenomenon. People see it as something brand new. But all of these machine learning algorithms go back many, many, many years. And it really comes down to neural networks. What we're doing now is we are doing everything we can to make machines and computers mimic the human brain and mimic the decision-making process that the human brain goes through. And literally, we've gotten so good at it now that we are probably the last GPT-4 had about the raw intelligence of a dog. The first one had the raw intelligence of a bumblebee. So now we're reaching the thought process and the decision-making process that a dog would have. They thought that it would be about 10 years before we got the decision-making and the ability to reason of a human. There is now predictive analysis that says we're going to get there in the next 3 or 4 years. So machine learning tied to artificial intelligence is very close to being able to mimic the thought processes and the decision-making capabilities of the human brain, which makes all of us obsolete at some point. All of it, make your money now, because we're all gonna go home and intergalactic overlords are gonna run everything, and we're gonna be here in that way. And it started with the perceptron. Back in 1957, it had one single input layer, one single analysis layer, one single output layer. It was very simple. Today's neural networks are billions and billions of input, analysis, and output layers. It has literally no theoretical limitation, zero. The more data we pump into it, the more compute power we give it, the stronger and the faster it becomes. There is no theoretical physics limit to how much we can process in today's modern neuroscience and neural networks. And machine learning, who here has trained machine models besides Ash? Put your hand down, Ash. One of the things that we learned early on and we took from marketing, played into AI and machine learning is that the machine learning, the AI has a bias and it wants to make easy decisions. Like the human brain. Our brain likes to make very simple decisions. Nobody in this room is thinking about whether they tied their shoes this morning. You tied your shoes, your brain compartmentalized that, and you moved on. Doesn't have to retain that information. Nobody's thinking about if they're sitting down comfortably. You sat down, you made sure your ass didn't hit the floor, and the brain processed that, it compartmentalized it, and moved on. So part of training these models is that we want to insert a third decision, an easy decision, just like the brain likes those easy decisions, but we want to discount it. We don't want the AI to have a bias. So let me give you a real world example. John,
Yes.
you and I are getting married. It's 2025, we can get married.
We're waiting for 2 decades for this.
2 decades, thank you. We've known each other a long time. For our honeymoon, we're going to go to Rome, and for $500 a night, we get our room and gourmet meals. Or we're going to go to Paris, and for $500 a night, we get our room and gourmet meals. Or we're going to go to Rome for $500 a night and just get a room. Which one are we going to do?
We're going to Rome and eat.
Right, right. Your brain very quickly discounted the obvious and easy path that was the least amount of value. That is where our asymmetrical dominance plays into part of the machine learning algorithms. We want to train these models that you're going to see an obvious, easy choice that is not the best choice. And we want to train these models and reward the models that you have discounted the obvious, easy one that doesn't make sense for what I want as my output and my end result. Discount it and move on to the levels of training that give us other analysis. So Rome with food or Paris with food, now the brain has to come up with other layers of thought and other layers of association in order to make that decision. Have we been to Rome 50 times? We want to try Paris. Do we love Italian food? We don't love French food? We want to go to Rome. There's other things that the brain has to pull out of the compartmentalized boxes and make a decision about in order to come up with what we believe is the best answer. How does DDoS fit into this? I promise I'm going to end this with how does DDoS come into this? So it starts with selling DDoS, right? That's easy. It's not easy. Again, we are selling a negative. We're selling an insurance policy. And the biggest fear that professionals, myself included, have when it comes to making these levels of decision is the fear of the unknown. And when I ask people, when we do our interviews around people, we ask, what is your biggest fear? And everybody has spiders and everybody has some level of fear. But then when you ask the deeper questions, all right, you're afraid of snakes. How many times have you been bitten by a snake? Well, I never got bit by a snake. So you don't know how bad it's going to be. You're afraid of the unknown. You're afraid your brain has made up a story about how awful it's going to be bit by a snake. So most of our fear, 99.939's worth of our fears, are really the fear of the unknown and the stories that our brain makes up about what's actually going to happen. So there's a couple different things that come into play here when we talk about adding a level of security into an infrastructure and how to get past the biases that people sitting across the table from you are going to have. And I know this could be skewed towards a sales kickoff presentation, but I promise you it matters here because we want to work on and discuss predictable outcomes. And one of the things that Carl and Corero and EJ and I did a lot of back and forth on was, what is my predictable outcome when it comes down to this? I had been with an incumbent for quite a long time, and my decision process and the level of scrutiny that I aligned to my decision to go with Corero fed into a lot of the things that come right down to how my brain operates, which is similar to how all of our brains operate. There's a certain level of unknown that we have to get past in order to make this a successful sale. The brain is really hardwired for predictability. Our brains like to have comfort. We like to understand and know what's going to happen tomorrow, what's going to happen in 6 months, what's going to happen next year. Our brain wants to put things into these tiny compartments, and we want to make sure that any level of predictability, to the best of our ability, is negated. In fact, the human brain likes predictability so much that our brain will manifest a negative outcome rather than have no outcome. And think about how crazy that is. I say it twice. We will make up a negative outcome in our minds so that we have a known predictable outcome rather than not know the outcome in any way, which is crazy. But think about what an uphill battle that is when you're sitting down across from somebody and they don't know what the next step is. They don't know how this level of protection works. They don't know all of the threats that are coming into an infrastructure. And so they're going to start with a negative outcome. They're going to come to that table thinking the worst case scenario, and this is what I'm dealing with. And now you're starting from the bottom, moving up, instead of starting from the top, moving them down in order to make this sale. So we're wired for efficiency. Brain likes to make shortcuts. Again, when something new happens, our brain compartmentalizes that experience. Now, it doesn't mean that the experience is bad, but it means that the brain, when a new experience happens, tries to associate that experience with something that it has lived with in the past. And it takes that experience and compartmentalizes it and associates it with something that has happened before. So Carl and I are talking in the hallway. We've done this a million times. And my brain compartmentalizes all the other decisions and all the other discussions that Carl and I have had in the hallway. First time I met Ash, we met in a conference room and we shook hands and started talking. And although it was familiar and comfortable, he's a nice guy and we laughed and we did our thing. Although it's familiar and comfortable, the very first time I sat down with Ash, we started talking technical and it became very clear that Ash operates here and I operate here. So my brain associates my discussions with Ash to my discussions with Carl. So it became something that was new, different, somebody who is speaking at a highly technical level, and my brain put Ash into the Carl box. And it became, for me, a comfortable situation, a situation where I could be open and honest and somewhat vulnerable. But again, it was new, and instead of fumbling and being awkward, which I'm great at, it became a situation where we're gonna have this conversation, I'm gonna get through it, and the next conversation we have, I think, is going to be much more productive because I've already compartmentalized Ash. I've already decided here is how our interactions work, and the next interaction that happens is going to be something that now I have something familiar that I can fall back on. Now the Ash conversations are a handshake, an embrace, let's talk about cigars, let's talk about more than just a technical deep dive. My brain made an Ash compartment and he lives in there comfortably. It's a nice two-story flat. It's he's good, we're good. So what does this, again, have to do with selling DDoS? It's an uphill battle to come to a security professional and tell them that you're going to be attacked, that you have an inherent danger in your business because the brain has something called the optimism bias. It's not going to happen to me. We know that there's bad things in the world. We read about bad things all the time. We believe that whatever's happening out there in the world is not going to happen to us. For whatever reason we believe it's not going to happen to us, we have firmly ingrained that there is a situation that is not going to affect us. And that uphill battle lays out a few different scenarios that we have to get past, and we have to understand the mind of these professionals that we're working with. If you think that that level of attack is not going to happen to you, it's a very uphill battle to convince you to spend the amount of money that an enterprise protection infrastructure is going to afford you. It's also an uphill battle for me to actively tell you that I'm selling you something that's going to actually give you some peace of mind and some peace and quiet. It's much easier to sell something to somebody that they really want than to sell them something that helps them avoid something they don't want. So we are not selling, Corero is not directly selling you peace of mind. What you're really selling is protection against something negative, which is, again, we are selling a negative. I've said this a million times in my discussions. It is an uphill battle, and it's a battle that you're better prepared for when you approach a cybersecurity professional and you understand that I'm selling you an insurance policy and here's how these layers are going to work. So there's a hard truth. It's easier to sell something desirable than it is to sell them something they wish to avoid. So the bottom line is we position security as the bigger part or part of a bigger protection infrastructure. It's not just one product that operates autonomously and on its own. For TierPoint, especially in the MSP and MSSP space, these levels of protection are something that we have to very carefully navigate with our customers. It's something we have to very carefully navigate. How does all of these layers fit in with each other, and what is the role of each one of those layers? And it comes down to, now it's called prospect theory. And this was invented in 1979 by Daniel Kahneman. Before prospect theory, there was a theory known as economic man. And economic man, for 100+ years, was the theory that was used for behavioral economics that stated that people make very rational decisions almost regardless of whether there was a bias towards a positive or a negative. If it's a 50-50 chance, then you're going to make a decision literally 50-50. But prospect theory proved that none of that was actually true, that humans make emotionally driven and cautious decisions based on their own biases and what their own belief systems are. So there was two scenarios that prospect theory came out with. One was the gain frame. Ash, I'm going to give you $500, or we can flip a coin and you can give away that $500, but you have the chance of winning $1,000. Second,
like a game show.
Right. Second to that is the loss frame. I'm going to take $500 away from you, but we could flip a coin and you could run the risk of losing $1,000. So if you look at the math for these two decisions, they're identical. These maths are absolutely identical, and yet 85% of the people who make a decision are going to be much more risk averse to their loss than they are to their gain. A gain is something that you remember a long time. It's a win. And yet that loss stings. And the brain does not like to compartmentalize losses. It's something that we do not like to deal with over and over. So again, this model, it shouldn't matter with whether you're dealing with a gain or a loss. Rational person will simply choose the option with the best expected value. And yet there is no best expected value in a 50-50 chance. It comes down to human biases and how the brain actually processes this information. So again, 85% choose the sure smaller gain, 40% choose the sure smaller loss. This has been repeated over and over with humans. It's been repeated with primates. It has been repeated with rodents. The same decision-making bias occurs across species, and it is hardwired into our brains. So, and we've come up with some heuristics for this. A sure gain is better than a risky chance, a bird in the hand worth two in the bush, or a risky loss is more appealing than a sure smaller loss, run away and live to fight another day. Over and over, species, socioeconomic, it's irrelevant what the class that sits in front of you is representing. These outcomes are the same and they're predictable. So, again, the most effective way to sell security is highlighting how this product enhances an overall cybersecurity platform and profile, not how it operates, in my opinion, as a standalone entity. And I'll kind of walk you through what brought my decision process based on my biases and the things that we had to overcome as part of bringing Corero into the mix. So we had been with the incumbent for quite a long time. We had invested millions, and then another round of millions, and then another round of millions in order to upgrade the boxes and protect our large infrastructure, 44+ data centers around the United States. We have invested heavily in dark fiber. We light our own dark fiber. We don't rent it from Google. We literally buy all the Equinox equipment, and we light redundant paths between all of the regions that my data centers exist in. And one of the ways that we think is an inherent value to being a TierPoint customer is that you get a baseline level of protection for free. We just give it to you. If you get your IP space from me, or if you buy your data pipes from me, you have a certain level of protection that gives us an advantage when we go into a competitive deal. Is it the same as my neighbor next door? No, it's not. They have certain protections. They're either buying upstream protections from Verizon. They're looking at things a little bit different than we did as an MSP. But there was an issue with how this market approach actually helped and or hurt us, and it was this, is that although I'm giving this away to you, it was one of those you don't know what you don't know until you know it. And we thought that we were running what we assumed was a world-class or best-in-breed DDoS protection at the edge of our infrastructure, meaning that our mean time to mitigation, because the incumbent system relied on multiple levels of analysis and triggering, was about 6 minutes, give or take 6 minutes, which we thought was acceptable. We thought that that was an acceptable amount of time to start mitigating this problem. The problem really is 6 minutes might as well be 6 years if there's a large volumetric attack that is taking your system down. So in the MSP space, not every client certainly has a /24. Not every client has that many IP addresses, and very few clients actually rent a gigabit or more of dedicated bandwidth from us. So if we're not triggering or protecting until a volumetric attack hits the 6 gigabit range, and when it hits 6 gigabits, then we do the challenge responses, we do all the analysis, we ingest the net flow, add 6 minutes to that level of triggering, and we had very negative experiences for our clients. So enter Corero, and we brought their infrastructure into our data centers, into the lab, and we started to fast track our level of testing with Corero because we could no longer stay with the incumbent. We found out some things very quickly. Number one, the technology, I sound like a salesman. The technology was much different than the technology we were used to. The ability to integrate and to have an API system that would allow Corero's edge protection to trigger and give us a better holistic understanding of the threat vectors across TierPoint's large ecosystem was better than any we had ever seen in the market. And the number one reason, the number 10 was price. The number one reason that we made our decision was because with Corero's infrastructure in the lab, we got our mean time to mitigation down to, in the lab, we got it down to about 10 seconds. 6 minutes plus to 10 seconds. Then when we actually deployed Corero across our ecosystem and tied into the dark fiber, we got our mean time to mitigation down to 6 seconds. So think about 6 minutes of somebody who's potentially dealing with the worst day of their life. If their infrastructure is technically up but unreachable, you're down. 6 minutes to 6 seconds. It was eye-opening. And it was eye-opening to me because I didn't actually make the decision. I entrusted my engineers and my operations team. We had 3 companies come in that we tested in the lab. And I said, I'm not making this decision. I'm not going to be the leader who forces a decision down upon my team. I want you to make the decision and report back to me what is the best technology and why. So again, it was a fast track. It was very intense testing. And they came back to me and said the boxes that we want to go with, the infrastructure we want to go with are the Corero boxes. Okay, why? Here's what we see, here's what we see, here's what we see, here's what it does differently. And by the way, we can ride on our large Juniper investments and make this a win-win. So we don't have to deploy a box in 44 different data centers. We can deploy large scrubbers with failover ecosystems and some smart logic in order to protect a large ecosystem around this level of attack and use our dark fiber infrastructure in order to absorb some of those attacks while we look at making sure that we keep the lights on for these clients. Decision made. We made the investment. Corero's team was instrumental in helping us get the deployments in place. And then came another revelation that we had never counted on. I had hinted earlier that TierPoint is certainly the largest in the United States for AI hosting. We had an AI customer outside of Dallas that had a huge volumetric attack. And we just did our standard thing. We drug their traffic back to the large scrubber, returned clean traffic, and we introduced 18 milliseconds worth of latency. 18 milliseconds from the actual attack through the scrubber, back across our dark fiber, delivering clean pipeline into this customer's environment. And I get a call from the customer, and the customer said, well, we had a large DDoS attack. Yep. And you protected us from this large DDoS attack. Absolutely, you're welcome. Well, we introduced 18 milliseconds worth of latency. Isn't that amazing? I said the old system was 10 times that easily. So this is really a clever infrastructure. Let me tell you about it. No, I don't care about it. 18 milliseconds worth of latency crippled our machine learning algorithms. Crippled it. Stopped them in their tracks. 18 milliseconds for how precise these systems need to communicate and balance their communication systems made it so that they were effectively out of business for the time of the attack. Okay, sorry. I went from you're welcome to oh shit. So we worked with Corero again and said, here's what we need to have in place. And we went back and forth, and EJ said, well, let's just put a box there, like right at the top of the rack. I said, well, we can talk about that. So we talked about it, and we went through another very fast round of engineering, and we did just that. We said, if you need that little latency with the amount of pipeline that we're giving you, we're going to put a Corero box top of rack, literally right at the top of your rack. And anything up to a 10 gigabit attack, which 99% of the attacks are well under 10 gigabits, anything up to a 10 gigabit attack is going to be dedicated to your infrastructure, and we will change your IP routing, and we will draw you back on our dark fiber. And we installed the box and started testing it. With the box at the top of the rack, we can absorb an 8 gigabit sustained attack, and they have less than 6 milliseconds of latency delivering that clean traffic back to their AI infrastructure, which is approximately 35,000 square feet of high density racks, all of which are coming in from a central point of communications. So less than 6 milliseconds of latency, this customer is always under attack, constantly under attack. You read about this company in the newspaper every day. They're doing amazing things out in the marketplace. 18 milliseconds of latency destroyed their business model. And one additional box from Corero with some network changes for us immediately kept the lights on and turned it into something that was an easy decision on where to go. So now we're literally struggling because my sales reps are like, we have 38 other AI companies, we're gonna sell them all a box. And okay. And then marketing said, we want to talk about this story. Yeah, I want you to. And my marketing company says, we don't have a SKU for this yet. Like every sales rep is gonna go nuts and go out and try and do this. So we are very quickly creating a SKU, and it is going to be our standard deployment now, that if you're high density AI, you're gonna have Corero boxes at the top of your stack in order to protect from hacktivism or whatever reason people are angry about large AI shops. We're going to get dedicated protection at the top of these racks in order to make sure that we don't have that level of engineering headaches ever again. So that's kind of where my story started. I appreciate everybody giving me a couple minutes. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer it. I'm happy to talk about why I hate Carl, if anybody's interested in that background story. Are there any questions about what TierPoint's doing and how Corero kind of came on board with this? No, quite. Did I explain everything well enough? John, oh, double hands, uh-oh.
Yeah. So going back to your story about the 35 milliseconds, are you seeing, or how are you defending against when your traffic coming from a large public provider like AWS,
Right.
and they are not showing their hands for anything. Like, how is that? How are you working through that?
So within the MSP space, we would never rely on one traffic feed from AWS or Azure or any of those infrastructures. Our model has been that we collate probably 10 to 12 providers into each of our regions, and we blend that internet and deliver guaranteed clean pipeline down to the customers. So if AWS gets saturated, we don't care. If Verizon gets saturated, we just don't care. We're blending all of that together.
Give you another mental model, because I like to think of these things very simply. We get asked the question all the time, well, I'm on AWS, I'm on Cloudflare, or I'm on Akamai. I get my DDoS from there. And I'm not trying to say that that's not a bad method, but to me, it's like buying bottled water. If you do nothing but drink bottled water, maybe that service you, right? That kind of thing. But it will not service you if you're drinking water in any other way, right? It's the same. If you're on that CDN, you're on Cloudflare, and all of your internet real estate is going through that CDN, and you have their service. By the way, Cloudflare is one of the only companies I know that sells DDoS, that on their website, it has a section that says, is Cloudflare down right now? And you go to the website and it shows you all the places in their community, in their world, in their services that is down. Intellectually, I just have a problem buying DDoS from a company that sort of has that ritual in their business. But the idea, it's like bottled water. So my point with the water analogy is that depending on how you consume, depending on how you like to consume, depending on how you like to have it fortified, depending on how much risk you want to take, filtration of your water is different to the individual, just like DDoS is, right? And this is what he's trying to say. Time to mitigation, time to detection, tolerance for your clean water, and where you actually get your water will factor into how you think about this. To think like in the past that you could just go to a faucet and drink it, I guess if you're from Flint, Michigan, you realize that that's not such a good idea, right? That kind of thing, right? So that's, I think, the world that we're in. There's only a few companies in the world, and I know I'm going to go on the sales thing here, that actually make tech that filter no matter what the scenario of the architecture that you deploy, right? There are many companies that provide a solution situationally. There are very few that can give you the tech to be able to do it no matter what your architecture is required to do. And that's what we do, right? That's why you're here. That's why we're talking about what you do. And we think very hard about the filtration ways, about how you want to deploy it, how you want to use it, how you want to take the risk of it, and so forth. So, and the answers are different, just like your water in your house. If you want added filtration at the faucet, at the refrigerator, at the house, inclusive of water supplies that you get, and so forth, it costs you more money, right? It just does. It's more complexity, and that's what it is. I can tell you why Paul hates me. About 25 years ago, I came into contact with Paul, and he came to me and said he wanted to do something, and I told him he couldn't do it.
It wasn't just do something, it was creating the world's first CFR Part 11, not the world's, the Pennsylvania's first CFR Part 11 compliance for the storage and distribution from my integration after I sold my company to Harvard. We needed a safe place for this data to land, and there was a long list of strict compliances we needed to meet. I went to Carl's company and got introduced to Carl and said, here's my idea, here's how I see it flowing. And Carl took glasses and he's like, no, your idea's not gonna work. Yeah, of course it's gonna work. I wasn't asking you to design it. I was asking you, can you help integrate it and help it launch? And he's like, yeah, we can, but it's not gonna work. We're done. So I left. And I went and found another company to integrate exactly what I designed. It didn't work. So I went back to, very begrudgingly, I went back to lick my wounds, and Carl had sketched out, here's what I think needs to happen. So shamelessly and with zero accolades, I took Carl's design and I redesigned the infrastructure, and it worked, and we passed our certification on the very first try. So we run into each other 10 years later. I'm like, I know you. Carl's like, don't I know you? Oh, you know me. So I've had a grudge ever since. I don't like to be wrong. So thank you. Are there any other questions? Thank you. Oh, what do you got?
Yeah, good to see you, Paul. We use this case study a lot, right? It's a really good example of how the technology works and how it's benefiting you as a customer. I hope I'm not setting myself up for fail with this question, but coming up to a year now with the partnership, how have you found the service side of what we've been delivering?
The service has,
Supported you beyond just the technology?
I will tell you that I don't interface with the service side directly. I have never once had a single complaint from any of my SOC personnel or engineering staff about the service. And I got lots of complaints with the incumbent because the service had degraded to the point of being non-existent. We became DDoS experts because we had to, because we didn't have a backbone or anybody in the back channel who was helping to make sure that our systems were available, operating correctly, upgrades, zero-day patches, etc. I haven't heard a single damn thing, which is magic, about any of our Corero interactions. So I can tell you from that little nugget what it's worth. That means that there's zero issues and that the service has been fantastic. And again, 10th on my list was price, but Corero's price was great.
Just on the service thing, if anyone's ever interested, you should look up other manufacturers of DDoS equipment's NPS scores. I didn't know you could get it negative. One of them has a -8. I didn't even know it was possible. I don't work for Corero either.
It's just a -8.
Yeah.
I strive for that. That's great. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul.
Any other questions? I'm going to give you back 2 minutes. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Paul.